Before we start, it's my privilege to introduce Rabbi Zelikovitz to give the invocation.
It's indeed a tremendous pleasure to see all those who came, all those who organized this important gathering. We all understand that it's a little bit of a difficult time for gatherings at this point, but yet those who made the effort. And why is it so important? Because this past Shabbos was Parshas Zachor. Parshas Zachor meaning remembering. Parshas Zachor meaning that we're supposed to remember what transpired, what happened. Specifically, Parshas Zachor is what Amalek, when they attacked us. The non-Jewish nation of Amalek attacked us. But the Rishonim, our commentators, tell us the reason it's important to remember is that we should remain vigilant. It's not a historical thing that happened thousands of years ago and then it ceased, it ended, but it's a constant. We as a Jewish nation are always attacked and always persecuted. And I'd like to give a bracha to the Holocaust Memorial Committee, who I see Vivian and Barry and some other members of the committee that are here, for doing this worthwhile work, keeping alive the memory of the Holocaust and keeping the Zachor, our Parsha Zachor of our generation, alive, and to all those who came and joined in order to keep this memory alive. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Almighty, should give us bracha and hatzlacha, and we should only see peace and security from here on in. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. Before I introduce my co-president, I just want to say a few words. Of course, Rabbi summarized very well. Everyone here must understand that we can't live in peace, security, or even democracy in this society with the pollution of anti-Semitism and with the pollution of racism and other forms of racial hatred. And so that's, of course, why we must do events like this. We must keep up the memory of the Holocaust. We must fight against the revisionism about the Holocaust. And of course, that brings us to the very important point of why why we're so honored today to have with us perhaps the man who is best known, most prominent in the whole world today for fighting against this revisionism, for hunting down ex-Nazis and perpetrators of genocide, Dr. Efraim Zuroff. And so we're really, really honored to have him here today for that purpose. In regard to the issue of Croatia, also, I would say that Dr. Zuroff has perhaps done some of his very best work even in regard to hunting down the fascists who carried out the genocide in Croatia during World War II. Croatia was established by the Nazis in April of 1941 as a puppet state, but it had its own Nazi party, the Ustascha, and they themselves killed somewhere around 40,000 Jews in their territory, out of about 60,000, and overall with the Nazis they killed 65,000 Jews in Yugoslavia out of about 80,000, so that's about 80%. The Croatian fascists had their own racial ideology and their own racist party, the Ustascha, which set up one of the biggest camps, Jasenovac. And I think that what Dr. Zuroff has done in regard to fighting, first of all, hunting down former camp commanders like Dinko Šakić and other Nazi war criminals from wartime Yugoslavia is one of the most important things that anybody has ever done since World War II. So that's one of the reasons why he's here today. But he's also spoken out against the very great threat of revisionism in former Yugoslavia, particularly in the state of Croatia, which had only the history of being a Nazi puppet state prior to 1991, and where the revisionism is very strong, and where the big camp of Jasenovac, where hundreds of thousands of people died, has a museum, and it was Dr. Zuroff really who really spoke out against the misrepresentation at that museum. That was really one of the most important things anybody has done in recent years. I'm sure Dr. Zuroff will explain these and other very important matters today, but first I want to introduce my co-president and wonderful colleague, Vivian Singer, who will introduce Dr. Zuroff. Vivian.
I thank all those who turned out today. Because of various factors, we were told that people would not be showing up, but it's important for the people who are here. I'm very excited to have Dr. Zuroff here for two reasons. The first reason is he's been my childhood friend all my life. His family and my family were very close as he grew up not far from here. He received his BA in History with honors from YU, and in 1970 he moved to Israel, where he did his master's in Holocaust Studies at Hebrew University and wrote a PhD in the role of the Vad HaHatzalah, the rabbis who were taking part to help the war effort in 1939. So scholarly was this work that he won the Histadrut Prize, and he won the Samuel Belkin Prize for a literary work. He has a whole list of unbelievable, which I'm not going to stand and I'm going to read it. Usually I say things by heart, but in Rabbi Zuroff's case, Dr. Zuroff's case, it's a Freudian slip because his father was the principal of TA. But in Dr. Zuroff's case, I just want to summarize that his relationship with the Simon Wieseltier Center began in 1978 when he was asked to join executive director of the center in LA. His first act was a leading role in establishing the center's library archives and was historical advisor for the then Academy Award documentary Genocide. In 1980, he went back to Israel to work with the Department of Justice in researching a lot of war criminals in the United States. He then returned in 86 back to the center, where he did a lot of work in uncovering the passages of Nazis through various European countries and getting indictments against them. As Barry said, he was very important in Jasenovac. He got arrested, extradited, and prosecuted Dinko Sakic, who was the former confidant of Eustasia concentration camp in Jasenovac. This man, who did so much damage, was sentenced to the maximum of 20 years. He also exposed Dr. Sander Kipro in Budapest, a man who did mass murder of 2,000 civilians in the city of Novi Sad, and he was made, Dr. Zuroff, an honorary citizen of the suburban city. He wrote several books. His newest book is available after the lecture for signing and buying. There's been 5 documentaries on him, and he'll be in a new one, The Hunted. He's written over 450 publications in the Simon Wieseltier archives, in Yad Vashem, Boston Globe, Jewish Week, and I know that every time there comes a headline about a Nazi, I know that he's going to be quoted. So without further ado, I don't use my notes, and I turn it over to Dr. Zuroff.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you very much to Vivian and to Barry, and of course to all of you who braved coronavirus to show up here for this lecture, and hope you'll feel very vindicated by coming. You know, that introduction sounded very good, but it reminded me of a story about Lyndon Johnson. Once Lyndon Johnson was introduced in a very effusive way before he gave a lecture, and his response was that my father would have found that introduction very interesting, but only my mother would have believed it. Today I'm here to talk to you about a subject that's becoming increasingly dangerous, increasingly serious. We're talking about the phenomenon of Holocaust distortion in Eastern Europe. Now, I just want to make one thing clear. We're not talking about denial, which is a separate problem. The good news is that, for the most part, in the Western world, the fight against denial has been won. Now, I don't mean by that there are no people who deny that the Shoah took place or the Shoah was much reduced or much less than what actually took place. What I'm saying is that there's no mainstream, normative, political party or social organization in the Western world which disseminates Holocaust denial. Now, this is thanks, of course, to the dedicated work for the last 70 years of people all over the world, people from all walks of life, all different religions, who have devoted their lives to finding the documentation which proves the Shoah and making it available in museums, on the internet, etc. And I just want to make one comment in that regard. You know that the Holocaust is the most documented tragedy in human history. Millions, literally millions of documents, written documents. You have thousands and thousands of photographs. You have film clips. So why do you think that someone would try and claim that the Shoah didn't take place? The reason is very simple. Holocaust denial is not merely, but it's basically a new form of anti-Semitism. You know that anti-Semitism exists for hundreds of years, and in the Middle Ages, it was the Black Plague. It was more recently, of course, it's the Jews control the media, the Jews control the financial markets, the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And imagine for a minute what people would think about the Jewish people if it turns out Shoah didn't happen. So this is basically anti-Semitism, okay? And we've been successful to a large degree in the Western world in combating it, but the real challenge now has become the Muslim world and the Arab world, where not only do you have extensive Holocaust denial, but it's in various cases, it's government-sponsored and comes from government. In other words, when people see for example, previous president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, going on national television and saying that the Shoah didn't happen, I'm sure most Iranians, or many Iranians, most Iranians understand it's not true. But there's enough people out there who might believe him because he's the president and has that authority. So this is definitely a very serious challenge. Yad Vashem and the Wiesenthal Center both have websites in Farsi. There's something called the Aladdin Project, which trains teachers to teach the Holocaust in Northern Africa. There are initiatives, but we're only at the beginning of a very, very long uphill fight. Now, but I want to move over to Eastern Europe and to explain to you about the phenomenon of Holocaust distortion. To be honest, this was not something that we saw coming, and it is only getting worse and worse over the past years since the Soviet Union crumbled. But in order to explain it to you, you have to go back to the history of the Shoah. In every country occupied by or allied with Nazi Germany, the Nazis tried to enlist local helpers. Now, there were three reasons for this. One ideological reason and two practical reasons. The ideological reason was that the Nazis wanted to show that the entire local population supports the measures that they are going to take against the quote-unquote enemies of the Reich. Primarily Jews, but not only Jews, Jehovah's Witnesses, homosexuals, communists, gypsies, etc. The two practical reasons were the following. The Nazis controlled an area stretching from the beaches of Normandy in the west all the way to the gates of Moscow and Leningrad in the east. From Narvik, Trondheim in the north of Norway, all the way to the Greek islands. Everywhere on that continent, I'm excluding, of course, this, Great Britain, except for the 6 neutral countries, was controlled by the Nazis, basically. So the 6 neutral countries were Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and Turkey. Okay? So with those exceptions, every single country was affected by the Holocaust. Now, they're about to unleash or proceed to implement an unprecedented mass murder operation. Okay? Initially focused on the Jews, but in the long run also directed at the Slavs. Okay? They come to a country like Lithuania. They don't know the local language. They don't know the local geography. They don't know the local topography. And we're talking about, initially, it was murder by bullets. It was individual murders. It wasn't murder in gas chambers. That came only later. Okay? How on earth are they going to pull it off without very serious help from the local population. Okay? To give you an example, something that I learned actually not that long ago and really is absolutely shocking. During the Nazi occupation of Lithuania, okay, in Lithuania, 220,000 Jews lived under the Nazi occupation, of whom 212,000 were murdered. Only 8,000 Jews survived. There were less than 1,000 Germans in Lithuania during the Nazi occupation. Less than 1,000. During the Russian occupation of Lithuania, from June 1940 to June 1941, there were 150,000 Russians. So who do you think did all the dirty work? Who organized all the logistics? The locals, of course, the locals. Okay? Now, there was a very significant difference between the nature of collaboration with the Nazis in Eastern Europe to the situation in the rest of Europe. And keep this in mind, this is very important. Outside of Eastern Europe, collaboration with the Nazis basically included the initial steps of what we call the final solution. Defining who is a Jew, passing discriminatory legislation against Jews, making it impossible for Jews to earn a livelihood, conduct any sort of normal life, eventually in some places concentrating them, not in every place, and eventually arresting them and putting them either on trains or boats from Greece, boats from Norway, but the rest trains, to send them somewhere else to be murdered by someone else. Okay? That somewhere else was Eastern Europe, and that someone else were the Nazis, the Einsatzgruppen and the death camps, and the local population. So in other words, what went on in these countries, I'm talking about Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Ukraine, Belarus, Croatia, to a certain extent Poland, although Poland is a bit of a different situation, which I'll explain to you. The local population actively participated in systematic mass murder. Okay? Now, these countries were not, when they were liberated from the Nazi occupation, okay, they did not become liberal Western democracies. They basically exchanged a Nazi occupation either for becoming part of the Soviet Union, in other words, Soviet republics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Ukraine, Belarus were Soviet republics. The other countries, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, etc., became communist dictatorships. Okay? Now, the communists were the ones, in other words, who decided what would be the narrative of what had just taken place, World War II and the horrors of World War II. And they did their own manipulation of those events. So first of all, I don't know if you're aware of this, the term Holocaust was never used in the Soviet Union until late 70s, early 80s. The Soviets never acknowledged that the Jews were singled out by the Nazis to be murdered. So let me tell you a little story, maybe some of you know it. The site of the biggest mass murder in the history of the Shoah was at Babi Yar. On September 29, 30th, 1941, 33,771 persons were murdered by the Nazis and the Ukrainian security police. Okay? For many years, nothing was done to mark this site, to mark the mass murder, the atrocity. And then some genius, you'll excuse me, in the Kiev municipality came up with the idea of building a football stadium on the site of Babi Yar. Now that did not take place, primarily because of a very brave non-Jewish Russian poet by the name of Yevgeny Yevtushenko, who wrote his famous poem Babi Yar, a cry for the victims. So they dropped that idea, no football stadium was built there, and a little monument was set up or something which had the following caption: to the victims of fascism. Nice caption. But what does it hide? It hides the identity of the victims. It hides the identity of the perpetrators. In other words, if they wanted to tell the truth about what had happened at Babi Yar, they would have written that on this spot, 33,771 primarily Jews, but not only Jews, were murdered by the Nazis, Einsatzgruppe C, if you really want to know the exact thing, Sonderkommando A, and the Ukrainian security police. But of course, that wasn't written there. If you went to Ponar, outside Vilnius, today called Vilnius, 70,000 Jews murdered, same caption, to the victims of fascism. If you went to Rumbula, outside Riga, between 25,000 and 30,000 Jews murdered on November 30th, December 8th, 1941, to the victims of fascism. Mali Trostanets, outside Minsk, 200,000 victims, okay? Same thing. In other words, during the communist time, by the way, the war, even World War II, was never referred to as World War II in the Soviet Union. What did they call it? The Great Patriotic War. In other words, in the eyes of the Soviets, in the eyes of the communists, this was the ideological battle, the great battle of the ideological titans. Bolshevism, communism against Nazism. And thank God, I mean, with all its flaws, it was the Soviet Union that won, not the Nazis, of course. Okay. In other words, during the entire period of Soviet domination, communist domination, these countries did not really have an opportunity to learn the truth, to write the truth, and to teach the truth. Now, when did they get their first opportunity actually to deal with the facts? When the Soviet Union crumbled. Okay? In Romania, 89, in the Baltic countries, 1990, Ukraine, Belarus, 1991, the rest of the whole Eastern Europe, all of a sudden, are making the transition to liberal democracy. Believe it or not, from the very beginning of this period, the Holocaust became a very important subject for these countries. Now, if you're wondering why, it's very simple. What was the major foreign policy objective of all these new democracies? What were they most afraid of?
The friends with the United States.
Exactly, but a little more than friends. Their greatest fear was that the Russians will return. Think of a country like, again, that I use Lithuania a lot because I'm very close to that country. I wrote a book about it now. Imagine Lithuania having to confront the military of the Soviet Union. Okay, or Russia. It's now Russia. It's not Soviet Union anymore, okay? You think Lithuania can defend itself? You think Latvia can defend itself? You think Estonia can defend itself? Even Ukraine would have problems, and Belarus, etc., right? So how do they solve the problem? What are they going to do? It's obvious. They have to get into NATO and the European Union, right? They're the ones who are going to protect them. All right, but 1 second. How do we do it? How do we do it? We have to make friends with the Jews again. Because the Jews, especially in America and certainly Israel, have a lot of influence in terms of NATO, in terms of European Union. Okay? Now, I don't know how many of you know this, but probably the only place in the Western world where they still believe in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, you know what that is? That's the anti-Semitic tract about a supposed meeting of the leaders of world Jewry on how to control the world. Now, it was written in 1905 by the Russian secret police and published all over the world. You can still get it very easily in the Arab world, in Muslim world. You go to the Cairo Book Fair, or you go to Saudi Arabia, no problem. But I mean, it's been thoroughly refuted in the Western world. But in Eastern Europe, they still believe it. And it was clear to them that the Holocaust was an obstacle. It's how they're going to get the support of Israel and American Jewry if they don't come clean in the Holocaust. But of course, the problem is that their story, is quite problematic. Now, there were 6 specific issues which these countries had to deal with when it came to the Shoah. Okay? One was acknowledgement of guilt and apology. 2, commemoration of the victims. 3, prosecuting unpunished Nazi war criminals. 4, writing the history all over, because all the history books had to be thrown out because they're all Soviet propaganda, communist propaganda, right? 5 was textbooks, education, textbooks, history textbooks. And the 6th was restitution. Okay? Now, I'll tell you a funny story. I am often invited to Yad Vashem to speak to teachers from all over the world who come to learn how to teach the Shoah. And among them are a lot of teachers from Eastern Europe. So I always used to, starting about 20 years ago, I used to ask them, no, what do you think? What's the most difficult to do of the 6 tasks? So almost everyone said in the beginning, no, not restitution. Almost everyone said in the beginning, of course, apologizing. In other words, acknowledging guilt and then making an apology. Okay, but now they don't say that anymore, because what happened? That's the only thing that they actually did. But the people realized that it was done by politicians. And very often it was done in Israel, not in the home country. And when they went back to the home country, they got severely attacked by the media. How do you apologize to the Jews? They're a bunch of communists. They sent us to Siberia. Don't ask. Okay? But they thought that if they apologized, that obligates them to the other 5 things. Okay? But that, as time went by, they realized it was always done by politicians, and politicians can say whatever they want. It doesn't obligate them to anything. Okay? So, what we see today is that the way that these countries dealt with those issues is a direct product, a direct result of the narrative that they created as far as World War II. Okay? In other words, you go to a country like Lithuania today, okay? What's the narrative of the Shoah? The nasty Germans and Austrians came to our country, they killed our Jews, Nebuch. Boo-hoo-hoo, terrible. If you press them, they'll say, yes, there were a few degenerates who joined the occupier and participated, but they're not part of our society, okay? We'll get to this a little bit later on. In any event, what we're seeing is that basically these countries are paying lip service. The easiest thing, it turns out, is commemoration. Commemoration, you have a tekes, you have a ceremony for dead Jews, hallelujah, right? You commemorate the Holocaust. In terms of writing the history, in terms of writing the school books, changing the textbooks, telling the truth in the textbooks, okay? In terms of prosecution, okay, that's something that I've dealt with very, very seriously. It is very, very, very hard to get any Eastern European Nazi collaborator prosecuted in Eastern Europe. It's almost impossible. I talk from experience. In Lithuania, for example, we got three trials of people, by the way, who were first in the States. And in the United States, as you probably know, you can't prosecute a Nazi for the crimes that they committed, because the crimes were committed overseas and the victims were not Americans. So in other words, they're prosecuted. I jokingly call it the Al Capone compromise. You know what I mean? Just like the way they nailed Al Capone for income tax, they're nailing these people because they lied on their immigration applications later when they became citizens. But the good news is that it's much easier to win a case like this, a immigration violations case, than to prove that someone committed murder. So the Americans have been actually very, very successful. They've won more cases than any other country over the last 30 years. And they've done a really good job. Witness the latest result of Thursday, when Friedrich Karl Berger, who served at the Neuengamme concentration camp, was ordered deported from the United States. And it's just one of many victories. Probably, I hesitate to say this, but most probably the last one in the United States, not in Germany. But in any event, you know, I don't know if you're aware of this. If you want to become an American citizen, you need good character. Did you know that? But so if you're born in America, it's no problem. You understand? In any event, so in Lithuania, there were 3 trials. There were 2 convictions, but not a single one of those people sat one day in jail. Not one. So you understand, if there's no punishments, no one's punished, maybe there weren't any crimes. And this is repeated all over. Now, I was asked to focus a little bit on Croatia, so I want to talk to you about Croatia and use this as a perfect example of a country which refuses to face its past and has invented really a false narrative, which is, I would say, in a certain sense, it's like a total desecration of the memory of the victims of the Croatians. So in Croatia is actually a special case, because in countries like Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, etc., the Nazis incorporated the local collaborators into a framework of mass murder. Okay, in those countries, they worked together with the Einsatzgruppen and facilitated the murders being carried out by the Einsatzgruppen. But in Croatia, something else happened, because in the wake of the occupation of Yugoslavia by the Nazis, they carved up the country into different pieces. And one of those pieces was what's called the independent state of Croatia, which basically was what's today Croatia, plus Bosnia-Herzegovina and a small slice of Serbia. Now, they did not serve as occupiers of that territory. They basically turned this country, this NDH, independent state of Croatia in Croatian, into a satellite state. And who did they turn this country over? A fascist, racist, anti-Semite, anti-Serb movement called the Ustasha. Exactly, okay? So the Ustasha were founded in 1929, and their goal was to separate Croatia from Yugoslavia because they resented the domination of the Serbs. They felt the Croats were mistreated, and to create basically a greater Serbia from the Adriatic all the way to the gates of Belgrade. Croatia. No, God forbid. No, a greater Croatia, excuse me. Okay? And in any event, it was established, the state was established April 10th, 1941, and within several weeks, Jews and Roma were declared non-Aryans, and the arrest of Jews, plunder of Jewish property, and 26 concentration camps were set up by the Ustasha throughout the areas of the NDH. In any event, these camps, I mean, there's a lot of confusion about these places. You often hear the term death camp applied, for example, to Jasenovac. Jasenovac is not a death camp because the definition of a death camp is a concentration camp with a special apparatus for mass murder, either gas vans or gas chambers. That was not the case in Jasenovac. It was individual murder by bullets, and there was pistols, guns, rifles, grenades, knives, swords, you name it. And the camp was an absolute hell on earth, notorious for the cruelty of the guards who went out of their way to torture the inmates. And I have news for you, there wasn't a single German or Austrian anywhere near there. This was all pure work by the Croatian Ustasha. Now, another interesting thing is that there's been a decades-long controversy over actually how many people were killed in Jasenovac. Okay, so the Croatians originally said not that many, maybe maximum 50. Serbs said 700,000. And neither figure is accurate. Neither figure is accurate. Apparently, okay, and I don't know if we will ever know the exact numbers, at least 100,000 people were murdered there. The majority were Serbs, by the way, not Jews. Okay, in other words, this is a fascinating from a historical point of view. It's a horrible thing. Basically, the Shoah in Croatia was a sideshow to the mass murder of Serbs. Okay, hundreds of thousands of Serbs were murdered in the independent state of Croatia. In Jasenovac, something like 50, 60,000 of them. Okay, 18,000 Jews, 16,000 Roma, and Croatia's political opponents. In other words, those Catholic Croatians who opposed the Ustasha, and there were quite a few of them. Many Croatians joined the partisans, for example. It was a country that was split, really. You had supporters of the Ustasha, who were probably the majority, but you also had many people who were dead set against the Ustasha, fought against the Ustasha, sacrificed their lives to beat the Ustasha. You had a camp like Sisak, okay? The only camp in Europe exclusively for children. Children were stolen from their homes. Serbian children, Jewish children were brought to this place to die of the conditions. Okay, 6,000 children died there. And you had Jadovno, for example, where Jews were thrown off cliffs to be murdered. They didn't even want to waste a bullet on them. And the majority there were killed who were Serbs, by the way, not Jews. Okay, so in other words, this is a place So this was basically the story. I'm summarizing it. It's a horrible story. Jasenovac, for example, was called the Auschwitz of the Balkans. Okay, that was the nickname of Jasenovac. Now, so what happened after the war was very simple. The story that the Yugoslav government tried to produce was the story of the partisans, the story of the heroism in defeating the Nazis, and basically glossed over what had happened in Croatia. Now, I'll give you one fact. When I read it, I was so surprised, I couldn't believe it. Tito, okay, was the leader of the partisans, okay, never visited Jasenovac. In the whole time that he was president of Yugoslavia, the head of state, he never went there once. And part of the reason was that Yugoslavia tried to present a picture of multinational harmony, united by communism, okay? So they didn't dwell on the NDH, they didn't dwell on the Ustasha crimes, and this is part of the reason why, when Croatia became independent, they had the chutzpah to try and gloss over those crimes. So just to give you several examples, okay? First of all, in the textbooks, the Ustasha are presented like the forerunners of Croatian independence. In other words, we would never have an independent Croatia today without the brave Ustasha who paved the way for Croatian independence. Okay? There's not a single word in the textbooks about the crimes of the Ustasha, about the fact that the Ustasha are a genocidal movement, not only against us, the Jews, but also against the Serbs. Okay? And at Jasenovac, for example, I was there, I visited, and they put in a new exhibition in 2006, and I was absolutely shocked. I couldn't believe my eyes. You go in there, they talk about the Ustasha, they mention the Ustasha, that committed crimes, but you have no idea who they are. Who founded the movement? What was the ideology of the movement? What were the goals of the movement? And even worse, in Jasenovac itself, there's not a single photograph of one of the 5 commanders of Jasenovac. As if it's, you don't want to attribute a crime to a Croatian hero. These Ustasha heroes. Now, in that respect, I have to say a few words about the Šakić trial. Dinko Šakić was one of the 5 commanders of Jasenovac, and he's probably the most important Nazi that I helped bring to justice. Okay? And I have to say, yeah. Me, yeah. Moi. Hakem, wait a minute. Wait a couple of minutes. Okay? Well, I'll answer all your questions later. There's going to be Q&A, don't worry, okay? So, like many Croatian Ustasha, he was able to escape to Argentina. Now, I don't know, I assume many of you have heard about the rat lines. The rat lines were the escape networks that were created by an Austrian bishop named Alois Hudel, who set up safe houses, which were usually monasteries on the way from Austria and Germany across the Alps into Italy to Genoa. There, the people were given false identities, and they had a choice of destination. They could either go to South America, primarily to Argentina, but not only to Argentina, or they could go to the Middle East, to Syria and to Egypt, okay? Now, Croatians are actually among the only Eastern Europeans who use that route, because Alois Hudel's deputy was a Croatia Ustasha priest by the name of Krunoslav Dragonovic. So he was able, for example, to send Ante Pavelić. Ante Pavelić was the head of state of the NDH, one of the biggest mass murderers in World War II and in history in general, and he was able to escape to Argentina. And Šakić was also among those who was able to escape to Argentina, and we found him there with the help of an Argentinian journalist named Jorge Camarasa, and we sent Camarasa with the TV crew. He went with a TV crew to confront Šakić in his house in Santa Teresita, south of Buenos Aires. Okay, knocks on the door. Šakić comes to the door. Are you Dinko Šakić? Yes. You, the commander of Jasenovac? Says yes. Now, wait, let's stop there for a minute, okay? Normally, when a Nazi is about to be exposed, what are the answers? No, it's not me, mistaken identity, or it's me, but I didn't do it. What does Dinko Shakic say? And this is more than 50 years after Jasenovac was closed down. It's me and I did it. So Kamarasa says to him, listen, I want to ask you a few questions. You are the commander of Jasenovac. I have questions for you. So, okay, no problem. Come sit in my living room. They sit in the living room. Everything is filmed, by the way, by a film crew. It was shown the next day on the national news in Argentina, which, by the way, this is so ironic. The day it was shown was Yom HaShoah. Okay, Holocaust Memorial Day. Anyway, so Kamarasa says to him, listen, you are the commandant of one of the worst camps in Europe. What do you have to say for yourself? Says, what's the problem? Jasenovac was a penal colony, and every country has penal colonies, and every person who was in Jasenovac deserved to be there. So he said, Kamarasa said, listen, you can't fool me. I went to Belgrade, I met with survivors of Jasenovac, Yosef Ehrlich, and other people, and they told me all about the horror, the executions, the cruelty of the guards. What are you talking about? The typhus disease, that so many people died from typhus, the mortality rate was so high? What are you talking about? He says to him, no. Shaka says, no. You don't understand. The mortality rate in Jasenovac was the same as it is everywhere. And you just don't get it. You know what the problem with Jasenovac was? They didn't let us finish the job. You know what that means? Kill everybody. Kill all the Serbs, all the Jews, all the Roma, and all their political opponents. Yofi. That's why the problem is that's why he's a hero for half the people in Croatia. So when I visited Zagreb during the World Cup of 1998, I assume there's no soccer fans here, right? Okay, 1998 quarterfinals, Lyon, July 4th, 1998. Biggest upset in World Cup history. Croatia beats Germany 3-0 in the quarterfinals, okay? So, first of all, I was in the first half, I wasn't watching. I was walking through the street there, and all of a sudden the earth shakes. So I said to someone, what's going on? Is there an earthquake? No, Croatia scored a goal. Okay, so the earth is shaking. After the match is over, we go out to see the celebrations, and within 3 minutes, we see this group of 7 young men marching towards us, waving this gigantic flag. We can't see if it's an Ustasha flag or a Croatian flag, because they're actually quite close, quite similar. And these people yelling at the top of their lungs, Dinko Shakic. Dinko Shakic is in jail. He's waiting trial for mass murder. Okay, what do you think he scored the goals for Croatia? I mean, what are they yelling his name for? This guy was a hero. This guy was an ultra-patriot. If you want to understand Ustashism is extreme nationalism taking to ridiculous length, dangerous length. Okay? Listen, I'll never forget in the courtroom, one day he was being taken out by the police, by the guards, and the judge, Drazen Tripolo, who actually did a wonderful job, the Croatian judge, was in the corner in very intense conversation with someone, and he wasn't paying attention. So some of the people, supporters of Shakic, who came to the court that day, like this, accompanying him as he walks out. Sig Heil, Zadom Spremni in Croatian. That's the cry of the Croatian fascists. Okay? So this is a classic story. Now, the craziest part of all of this was there was not a single word in the museum about the trial of Dinko Shakic. I mean, this is absolutely mad. It's the best thing that Croatia did in terms of facing its past. By the way, it was the most important war criminal in Eastern Europe post-communism. Not one word. As if they're embarrassed about it. They had to, Nebuch, the Jews put pressure on them, they had to bring him to trial, Nebuch. Okay, let me turn now, we'll leave Croatia alone for a few minutes, and I want to turn now to Lithuania. Lithuania has been, I always say, is the locomotive that has pulled the train of Holocaust distortion all over Eastern Europe. So first of all, I gave you the statistics. In Lithuania, a small country, but a big Jewish community, 220,000 Jews under the Nazi occupation, of whom 212,000 were murdered. Less than 1,000 Germans in the country. Okay? Now, remember, we're talking about individual murder. 90% of the Jews of Lithuania were shot within a half an hour, even a couple of minutes from their homes, in many cases by their neighbors. We know that physical attacks on Jews began in Lithuania even before the first Nazi showed his face, because the leaders of the political parties of Lithuania had escaped to Berlin during the Russian occupation, set up the Lithuanian Activist Front in Berlin and expressed support for Adolf Hitler, and sent messages into Lithuania saying the day of reckoning is coming for the Jews. They exploited us, they robbed us, they sent us to Siberia, all the Jews are communists, the usual bull. Okay, so in 42 places there were physical attacks on Jews before the first soldier from the Wehrmacht showed his face. Now, there were righteous Gentiles. They were risking their lives to save Jews, and they managed to save a few thousand, but it's very small number. So let me begin with a scene from the 1991 dedication of a brand new monument in Ponar. Ponar is the site of the mass murder of the Jews of Vilna. 70,000 Jews murdered there, okay? For years, they had a small monument with the caption, "To the victims of fascism," okay? When Lithuania became independent, a Jewish survivor from Israel, Yoshua Spiegel, paid for a very impressive monument with plaques in 4 languages, in Lithuanian, in Russian, in Hebrew, and in Yiddish, which even mentioned that the Jews were murdered by the Nazis and their local helpers. Okay. The keynote speaker was Gediminas Vagnorius, the Prime Minister of Lithuania. And he said the following. First he said, you know that all this Shoah, right, all this took place in the blink of an eyelash. 3 months. What's he talking about? 3 years, 41 to 44, June 41 to summer of 44. But then it got even worse. And he said the following. The misdeeds of a few degenerates, criminal elements, cannot stain the reputation of a country that did so much to save its Jewish population. Did so much. Where are the Jews? They're buried in Ponar. They're buried in 234 mass graves all over Lithuania. I always say that one of the beauties of Lithuania is that you can get to a mass grave of the Holocaust within less than a half an hour from wherever you live. That's a joke, but it's not funny, obviously. Okay? Anyway, so, as I told you, they did everything possible to make sure that no one would be punished, despite our efforts to bring to justice. By the way, a lot of these Lithuanians first ran away to America. And they were prosecuted here, but not for their crimes, as I explained. So those who were ordered deported, 14 out of the 15 cases that I know of, they went right back to Lithuania. They're accepted there. Instead of putting them right in jail, there was a case of Aleksandras Laleikis, the head of the Saugumas, the Lithuanian security police in Vilna, had a staff of 100 men to guard the ghetto so that no one would escape and prevent anyone who wanted to help from helping. They were the ones who took the Jews to Ponar to be murdered. Okay? He arrives in Lithuania. What happens to him? He should be sent right to Lukoshka's prison. Ma pitom, no way. Took a couple of years until he was quite ill. And then Lithuania passed 3 bills, 3 laws in its Seimas, in its parliament, saying, number 1, you can investigate a genocide suspect even if he's not medically fit. Then you can indict a genocide suspect even if they're not medically fit. And third, you can have a video hookup to conduct the trial, even from a hospital bed, even if they're not medically fit. Laleikis wasn't even asked to show up at the trial. One time he came of his own volition. So instead of reading him the accusation, the indictment against him, they asked him, tell us, Mr. Laleikis, what, you have something to say? He said, yes, I did it all for my country. And then he had a heart attack on the spot, by the way. Anyway, so, you know, this is part of the whole business. And because the story in Lithuania is so difficult, and to make it even worse is the fact that some of the biggest heroes of the anti-Soviet resistance after World War II were involved in killing Jews during the Shoah. So you would assume in any normal country, if someone murdered his fellow Jewish neighbors, that would disqualify them from becoming a national hero. Not in Lithuania. You could become a national hero if you murdered Jews. So that's what we're up against. Okay, so the question is, what can you do? How do you combat this? So because of the success of the Shakich trial, and in the wake of the Shakich trial, there were some steps taken that were very positive, but they were short-lived, unfortunately. We were hoping that if we can get some of these Nazis prosecuted in Lithuania, it'll have a very beneficial effect in terms of teaching Lithuanian society what actually took place there. But as I explained to you, the Lithuanians made sure to make a mockery of the whole judicial process. So we ran out of suspects eventually, but then the story became, we sort of evolved into a fight over the narrative. In other words, it wasn't a fight to get people, actual people, criminals prosecuted. It was a fight to get the Lithuanians to tell the truth about what actually happened in Lithuania. Okay? So this has proved to be a very uphill battle. And to be perfectly honest, it wasn't easy as an outsider coming from Brooklyn, not actually from Brooklyn, from Israel, but from Brooklyn via, some Israel via Brooklyn, or the opposite, I forget anyway. But and with the kippah on my head, to be able to convince these Lithuanians that they have to tell the truth. But all of a sudden, I heard about a Lithuanian author who invited me to speak in Lithuania. I had been invited to speak in Lithuania for many, many years. And I went to meet her. I couldn't accept her invitation because I had already obligated myself to speak in the United States at the time. But I was in Lithuania to protest against a neo-Nazi march, March 11th. That's Independence Day, and it's the day when the neo-Nazis march in Vilna. Okay? So I said, let me meet this person. Let me see who she is. And I met her, and all of a sudden she tells me, listen, my relatives were involved in killing Jews during the Shoah. Now, I have to say, I nearly fell off my chair. I'd been coming to Lithuania for 30 years, since independence, and I never met anyone who ever admitted that. Never. And not only did she admit it, she wants to do something to atone for it. So, much shorter, we agreed we're going to go on a mission to try and go and visit 40 places of mass murder in Lithuania, okay? And we based it on our biographies. Now my family, my mother's family is from Lithuania, and her family, she grew up in Lithuania, of course. And we chose those places, and we added a couple of places, and we went from place to place. We even went to Belarus, because on October 6, 1941, a Lithuanian police unit was sent to Belarus. They murdered 20,000 Jews there in 15 different places, okay? Now, as we went from place to place, we taped our conversations. We spoke, we debated, we argued about the identity of the killers, the motivation of the killers, what role did anti-Semitism play? What role did the alienation between Jews and non-Jews play? For example, in Lithuania, you had 100,000 Jews living in provincial towns, Shtetlach. And basically what it was the Jews lived in the center. They were the artisans, they were the professionals, and the whole periphery was Lithuanian farmers. And the Jews were more educated, more successful, and I suspected that this was a problem. So just to give you one little example of that issue, I read many accounts that Jewish storekeepers would let Lithuanian farmers buy on credit. So Ruta, that's my co-author, Ruta Vanagaita, I said to Ruta, listen, you know, I heard in many places the Jewish owners, the store owners, let the Lithuanians buy on credit. So that shows that they were very, you know, they were nice to them. Says, no, you don't get it. That got the Lithuanians angry. This is our country. Why should we have to buy on credit? Let the Jews buy on credit. Anyway, that's one small thing. But we went, everywhere we went looking for eyewitnesses. So I'll tell you briefly one story, the story I think that made the biggest impression on me. I was in a place called Švenčionėliai. That's the Lithuanian name of Novošvencian, which was a small town right near where my grandfather was born. I see an old lady leaving the grocery store, and she says, I said to Ruta, no, go speak, I don't speak Lithuanian, so go get a hold of her and ask her what she remembers. She tells the following story. She's from a family with 2 girls, and she was very friendly with the Jewish family. Their family was friendly with the Jewish family who had 2 girls the same age. She was about 8 at the time, and her friend, the younger girl in the Jewish family was also that age. So when the decree started that a very, very heated discussion in their house about maybe they can save her friend. So I said to her, through Ruta, I said to her, well, you probably were very afraid of the Germans. She says, no, we weren't afraid of the Germans at all. We were afraid of our neighbors. And she started crying, really, really crying. And you could see that she hadn't told that story to anybody ever. It's like this gigantic rock was unloaded from her heart. And she finally heard someone who heard the story, and she was able to tell the truth and how much it hurt her that her friend was murdered. That's one example. Now, I'll give you another example. We went to museums, okay, to find out. Every middle-sized town in Lithuania has a municipal museum. So we went to Panovich because Ruta's uncle, the husband of her aunt, was the police chief of Panovich until August 29, 1941, which is a critical period because some of the murders were carried out during that period. Anyway, so we obviously went around. We visited the building of the Panovich Yeshiva, right? And we went to the museum, and I asked the guy in charge, a young guy, 28 years old. I asked him how old he was after I heard his answer. You'll hear in a minute. I said to him, "No, is there anything here about the Jewish community? About the fate of the Jewish community, the history of the Jewish community?" Jews lived in Panovich for over 200 years. There were about 7,000 Jews living in Panovich. He says to me, "No." So I said to him, "Are you aware of the fact that millions of people all over the world know the name of your city?" He goes, "What? Why? Why should they know the name of our city?" Then I explained to him, I said, "You know the bakery, the conditorry right opposite the bus station? That's the building of the Panovich Yeshiva." I had to explain to him what is yeshiva, what's a rabbi, what happened at Panovich, and all of this. And the guy was in total shock. And I came out of there and I said to myself, Ratzachta, Yarashta, Machakta. In other words, there's a famous story in Sefer Melachim, in the book of Kings, about the king Ahab and the prophet Eliyahu. And Ahab there was a vineyard right near the place where the king was living, and he wanted the vineyard. Okay, so he offered to buy the vineyard from Navot. He was the owner of the vineyard, and Navot refused. So Ahab killed him. And he took the vineyard. So he was confronted. Eliyahu Navi confronted Achav and said to him, Haratzachta v'gam yarashta. Did you murder and also inherit? And here I felt they murdered, they inherited, and then they erased. In other words, they erased any trace of the Jewish community. We went to another place called Ukmerge, Vilkomir in Yiddish. So first of all, we found a monument to Jonas Krikstaponis. Jonas Krikstaponis was one of the officers of the unit that I told you about was sent to Belarus. In the middle of the town, the guy's an officer of a mass murder squad, and no one says boo. And then we went to the museum in Ukmerge, and they had a whole big panel on the fate of the Jews of Ukmerge, sponsored by IRA. IRA is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Okay, it's a good organization, normally. And they said everything except about the fact that the Jews were killed. They said the Jews were killed. Only one thing missing. Who killed them? In any event, we wrote a book that's based on two things. So one is our mission, okay? In other words, we taped our conversations as we went from place to place, and we told the story of the place. That one of the things we discovered, for example, that mass murder sites are being sold. The 7th Fort, the first mass murder site in Europe, 5,000 Jews murdered there in early July of 1941, was sold to someone who has all sorts of events there. You can get married there if you like. You can go on a treasure hunt. You can do all sorts of things, and there's hardly a monument there or a sign that says that this is a mass murder site. And how do you sell a place like this? We went to another place outside Vilna, which is one of the more neglected places. All of a sudden, we made a ceremony there for Yom HaShoah in Lithuania. Lithuania has a Yom HaShoah. Just to give you a little example of how they operate. You know that a lot of countries mark January 27th, which is the day of liberation of Auschwitz, as a Holocaust Memorial Day. What did Lithuanians do? No. They have September 23rd. Why September 23rd? Because it relates to their history. That's the day of the evacuation of the Vilna Ghetto. But they were not involved in the evacuation of the Vilna Ghetto. The Germans did it. If they really wanted to deal with their past, they would choose October 28th, where 10,000 Jews were murdered by Lithuanians in the 9th Fort in Kovna. But God forbid, then they'd have to talk about their own crimes, right? Okay, so to make a long story short, the only reason this book was published was because Ruta was one of the most popular authors in Lithuania. So she had written a book of advice to women at 50, and she had sold 50,000 copies. So she went to see the publisher, and the publisher said to Ruta, you know, your book on women was so successful, why don't you write a book about men? She said, okay, I'll write a book about men, but before I write that, you're going to publish the book I'm writing now. Ah, Ruta, you're already writing another book? Eze Yofi, that's wonderful. What are you writing about? The Holocaust. What are you, nuts? Who's going to buy a book on the Holocaust in Lithuania? Said to them, you want me to stick with your publishing house? She's like the golden goose, you know, the goose that laid the golden eggs. You want me to stick with your publishing house? You're going to publish this book. So they said, on one condition. The condition was you don't tell anybody what you're writing about until the book comes out. Now that actually was very good because the book caught the government by total surprise. They were totally unprepared for this book, okay? And Ruta also, I mean, she's a real genius when it comes to marketing. She found the place, the headquarters of the special unit that murdered all the Jews in Ponar. And it's an Italian restaurant today. It was an Italian restaurant. And we made the launch there. And Ruta also interviewed the two most popular priests in Lithuania, the Catholic priest and the evangelical priest. And they did wonderful interviews. No one had ever asked them about the Shoah. Never. And they talked about the importance of memory, the importance of truth, etc. Anyway, the book, they printed 2,000 copies, sold out in 48 hours, eventually printed 20,000, sold 20,000 copies of the book. By the way, my name was not on the book, okay? On the book in Lithuania. Because if my name had been on the book, no one would have bought it. Because I'm like the most hated Jew in Lithuania. You get it? In any event, but a year and a half later, they took revenge on Ruta. There was an initiative to honor an anti-Soviet fighter, Lithuanian, in other words, who fought against the Soviets after the war. And it turns out that he had a very, very, how should I put it, very questionable past. And someone interviewed Ruta on TV, and they asked her, what do you think about this initiative? She said, listen, I'm not sure it's such a good idea, because this guy, I read his file in the KGB archives, and he's a questionable character. Next day, her publisher announces they're cutting all relations with her. She had just launched her autobiography a day before. 27,000 copies taken out of the bookstores to be turned into toilet paper. That's what they announced originally. And then she got the books back, but there was nothing to do with them because they're all in Lithuanian and no one wants to buy her books anymore. In any event, the head of the person who's like the father of Lithuanian independence basically told her, he wrote in an op-ed that now that she's betrayed the country, why doesn't she just go commit suicide? So Ruta Vanagaita is now living in Israel, Baruch Hashem, and she's safe. I don't know if she's safe from Corona, but she's safe. She's safe from the Lithuanians, and studying Judaism and studying Hebrew, and in a far better place. But the book itself was a bestseller, and the book started a very, very intense discussion there in Lithuania about what really happened. And this fight is going on. And one of the steps that we saw lately, which is no question the result of the book, the Lithuanian parliament was considering a bill to say that neither the Lithuanian nation nor the Lithuanian people ever participated in the Holocaust. Okay, and it was dropped. Now we just heard that the initiative to pass this law was dropped because we made a whole hullabaloo and we got it dropped. So I leave you with that thought, and we'll turn to questions now.
Thank you, Dr. Zuroff. A round of applause for Dr. Efraim Zuroff. Thank you very much. I will take the audience members as they come. Yes, please.
Would you be kind enough to give some clarity about Milosevic this country was very anti-Milosevic, but I had heard through various sources that he played a pivotal role in saving Jews during the Holocaust.
Shtuyot. Not true at all. Had nothing to do with it. I never heard that he had anything to do with saving Jews, Milosevic.
Next question.
Dr. Zuroff, it's an honor to be in your presence. As a survivor of my father was a survivor of the Holocaust, and 7 members of our family were killed during World War II. My father escaped a Nazi and Ustasha firing squad in 1943. The partisan brigade came and liberated our family, very close. So I wanted to address the football points that she made regarding 1998 and to the present day. Football, soccer here in the United States has become a big instrument within Croatia for promotion of the Ustasha ideal. Dr. Zuroff referenced 1998. To advance it to the present day is there was a match about 8 years ago between Israel and Croatia. Now, before the match, some Croatian Ustasha descendant painted a swastika on the pitch.
Grass. He made it in the grass, and you could see it very clearly.
Yeah, you could see it very clearly. It was so. To this day, it's celebrated. Another example is Simunic, who was expatriated to Australia. So Croatia qualifies. They're excellent soccer country, very high in the FIFA ranking. He had made, after Croatia had qualified in late 2013 against Iceland, he made the Nazi salute.
Ustasha salute.
Correct.
It's the same equivalent of Sieg Heil.
Right, but he also flashed the Nazi salute as well as saying Zadom Spremni. Well, thanks to Barry and yourself, he was banned for 10 games by FIFA, which effectively ended his international career. Yes. There's also been Nazi salutes by Mandzukic, who currently plays for Juventus. He did it during a match for Bayern Munich. That was about 2014. And he's since kind of learned his ways, but it's slowly, the rest of the team you had...
Can I add something?
Sure. Of course.
Okay, listen, I don't know, again, people here don't follow European soccer or world soccer, but in the last World Cup, Croatia really gave a tremendous performance and actually came in second. Now, a celebration was prepared in Jelačić Square in Zagreb. That's the biggest square in Zagreb for the team, and it was decided that there would be no politicians and no celebrities and no performers who were going to participate in this celebration. Now, one of the people who came to greet the team at the airport was a man named Marko Perkovic, whose nickname is Thompson. And he's a notorious Ustasha who sings songs of nostalgia for Stara Gradiška, which is one of the subcamps of Jasenovac. He sang horrible songs with a message of murdering anti-fascists, okay? And he went to greet the players, even though he wasn't invited, okay? And the players said, come with us. And when they got to Zagreb, they asked him to sing 2 songs, which he sang, nationalist songs. And they, of course, were singing along with him, the message being that this guy is terrific. To make it even worse, the past president, the one who was just defeated, thank God, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarovic, was interviewed, and she said that Thompson is a favorite singer, and she is the one who was photographed in Toronto with Croatian exiles, Croatian diaspora, in other words, Croatian emigres, with an Ustasha flag.
One last point. Two last points I wanted to make is I was watching the 2018 World Cup. It was Nigeria versus Croatia, and there was Croatia was winning late in the match. So they're substituting a player off. And I'm watching the game at a friend's house, and I notice this is the Croatian section. And there's a Croatian fan in the middle of the photo here. He's making a Nazi salute. And I just said, wait a minute, what's going on here? So I took a screenshot of it, and I'll share it with you as well. But I just wanted to note it so that everybody would see this. Lastly, regarding the numbers of people killed at Jasenovac, there was the Nazi general in charge there who noted between 1941 and 1943, he counted between 250,000 and 400,000 that Barry notes in his book. My German isn't that good. His name is von Hozo, and mispronouncing that, but that was his account of between 41 and 43. So.
I have to say one thing in that regard. First of all, I don't know if you're aware of this, but during the communist times, the number of victims in Eastern Europe, or all the area under communism, were grossly inflated. And I'll give you an example. Okay, so those of you who visited Auschwitz before the fall of the Soviet Union could see plaques in about 13, different languages talking about 4 million victims. Okay, simply not true. Now the number has been done scientifically. The number is 1.3 million victims, 1.1 million of whom were Jews, and the same thing applies here. Same thing applies here. The communist regime in Yugoslavia grossly inflated the number, and they confused two things. The overall number of victims, which is between 500,000 and 800,000 in Yugoslavia, with the number of people who were killed in Jasenovac. So you could read books, and some of our historians in Israel were also guilty of this. They wrote that 700,000 Jews were murdered in Jasenovac. It's simply not true. But there was certainly at least 100,000, probably more. The main victims, as I said, were Serbs, not Jews. The other victims were Gypsies, Jews, and Croatian anti-fascists.
Next, I'd like to call on, Yehuda, would you like to? Yes, I'll call on you. Yehuda is one of the members of the Holocaust Memorial Committee Board.
I am a survivor of the Holocaust, and I'm eyewitness the Hungarians. Hungarians did the killing. The Hungarian people did the killing. They took the people to the river, including my grandfather. Our building was a guy who was responsible for the building and was a member of the Nazi Party. He sent us, my mother and 3 little children, to a party house, what they have, the Nazi party house, and the arrow crossed. They send her there, it's like a roach hotel. You go in, you don't come out. Luckily, my mother, I don't want to take a whole story. My mother was smart, and she ran out of it and didn't let us in. But when we came back to the house where we live, he said, don't worry, tomorrow the truck will take you there. And it was all the Hungarian Nazis. My grandfather was one of the fighters who saved Jews. He worked with the so-called glass house. He was taking papers to other people, and they captured them, the Hungarian Nazis. As he goes in the street, they captured him. He had papers. He's a real old Christian. And the Nazi woman almost let him go, and one of the guys called him back, hey, come back, drop your pen. Pants. And when he dropped his pants, that's only the Jews are circumcised in Budapest. Took him to the river. And what they did in the river, if you know the monument with the shoes, that showed they made them naked, tied 5 people up, and shot 1. Because not 5 bullets for 5 Jews, 1 bullet for 5.
Did you want to respond?
I don't want to start arguing here.
Okay. All right. I'll just call on someone else. I wanted to call on Ari Kagan, who is a longtime supporter and friend and even member of the board. Ari, would you like to, please?
Vice President for 10 years.
Vice President.
First of all, I wanted to praise Holocaust Memorial Committee and Manhattan Beach Jewish Center for hosting this amazing presentation. I'm very impressed. I see you for the first time. I heard about you before, and I heard about the story of Ruta, how she suffered because she's not popular in Lithuania anymore. So my question is, yes, I have two questions. Number one, do you speak in front of non-Jewish audiences here in America? And also, do you speak in colleges or universities here in America and in schools here in America? Because unfortunately, not just in Lithuania, not just in former Soviet Union or any in Eastern Europe, but right here in Brooklyn, many young people have no slightest idea what you were talking about, have no slightest idea about Holocaust. And very often, members of Holocaust Memorial Committee try to stop young people from skating in the Holocaust Memorial Park. And it was vandalized twice, actually, Holocaust Memorial Park, here in Brooklyn, not somewhere in Lithuania. So do you speak in front of young audiences and non-Jewish audiences here in America?
Thank you, Ari.
Okay, that question was very opportune, because last Wednesday I spoke to over 2,000 elementary and high school children in a place called Greenville, Tennessee, where there's not a single Jew living. And we had an absolutely wonderful conference that was organized by the teachers, people who were incredibly passionate, non-Jews, all of them, incredibly passionate about teaching the Holocaust to their students. And ironically, the next day, the U.S. Justice Department announced that they're sending out, they got a deportation order against a guy living in Oak Ridge, right down, not very far from them. So I gave them a whole talk about the importance of justice, about Simon Wiesenthal, and about it's never too late to bring these people to justice. The next day, boom.
Mazel tov.
Please.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to this very important event. A few words about myself. I am the youngest Holocaust survivor during the Second World War. I was 1.5 years old and was captured by Germans after I was given to hands of Romanians in Ukraine, Transnistria region, and we were transported to concentration camp in Bogdanovka, Ukraine, where were killed 54,600 people. 127 families were killed, survived in that massacre, and between 127 from my family is 33. I was a survivor with my mama, grandmother, and my sister. I'm going to tell you, if you want it later, story about my life, but my question is, I'm attending every year, I'm attending United Nations on 27th January, every time, never ever from the stage, United States never pronounced Ukraine. Always we're talking about Auschwitz, we're talking about concentration camp, but Ukraine never. We're working very hard, our association, to announce about what was happening in Ukraine. Right now we were listening to you. Very, very powerful speech you got. But I prefer you mention to people what was happening in Ukraine. How many people were killed in Ukraine? How many death children was in Ukraine during the Second World War? Because this team was forbidden by Soviet Union. And nobody talked even in families. But right now, my question is, why we not restore a little bit story about Ukraine, about concentration camps in Ukraine? And like you understand, 54,600 exterminated camp in less than 40 days were killed. And nobody mentioned that. I prefer you to answer me on my question. Why in your stories is nothing said about Ukraine?
Okay, so first of all, I can't mention every single country that we're dealing with. I mentioned Ukraine quite a few times. I didn't go into the details. I didn't go into the details in Latvia. I didn't go into the details in Belarus. I went into the details in Croatia and Poland, and Lithuania, to give an example. Examples that I know very well, that I've been very active in. And first of all, there's no question that the issue of Holocaust distortion is a very serious one in Ukraine today. Thank God Viatrovich was fired from his position as the head of the Institute of National Memory. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you should do some research. But there's no question that the situation in Ukraine is very problematic. But as I said, it's only one of many countries. Same thing with the Shoah. By the way, there's a lot of research now in Transnistria, in Israel, and other places. There's wonderful historians, non-Jews like Per Rudling, Jared McBride, Tarek Cyril Amar, John Paul Himka, who are writing about what happened in the Holocaust in Ukraine.
Yes, please.
I really thank you for coming here and talking to us. My name is Fania Vasilevsky. I was born in Ukraine. My husband was born in ghetto in Ukraine. I've heard a lot of stories from my mother-in-law and from my sister-in-laws, how they survived. They survived only because they were under Romanians, not under Germans. But my question is right now, as you said, we have to watch closely what's going on in Ukraine now. As we all know, we have a Jewish president in Ukraine. But when starting from 1914 and going farther here, wait a minute. Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I saw in horror pictures or videos of celebration of Bandera's birthday, and Nazi. They were practically in Nazi uniforms with these signs and everything. And what we as because we have organizations, one Jew is only one Jew, but we have organizations, and people say, all the anti-Semites say that we're very strong, we are powerful, we have influence. Let's use our influence. How we can use influence to influence our State Department? Because we get a lot. Look, our president just got impeached for not giving enough help to Ukraine. And this is their words between Russia and Ukraine. We have to talk about ours, what's going on now. And I don't know, I am afraid to predict something, but I don't know how the Jews are going to be there because the economic situation is very bad there, and our State Department and our Congress are trying to close their eyes on what's going on in Ukraine. My question is for you, what can we do as this powerful organization? We're powerful to say something, to influence what's going on in Ukraine.
Very good question.
Okay, first of all, if you check on the internet, you'll see that the Simon Wiesenthal Center is one of the most active organizations combating Holocaust denial, the distortion in Ukraine. We're the ones who objected when they announced that Bandera's birthday will be a national holiday in Ukraine. We're the ones who protested when there were torchlight parades in Lviv and other places in Ukraine. But listen, you can't, I'm not living in America, okay? I have my hands full with the Israeli government, believe me, and it's not easy. Okay, so you have to appeal to your elected leaders and bring these points to their attention. I mean, we're working on this. We're trying to do whatever we can do.
And what about restitution in Ukraine?
Sorry. Listen, I'll be honest with you. I don't deal with restitution because restitution is a very problematic issue that it can't deal with every issue. Okay. And it has to be done the right way.
Yes, please.
Yes, Mike.
Michael, I haven't seen you in so long.
We're all friends already. We go back to when we tried to put together the museum in Shipshead Bay here, and I was able to get to make sure that the Croatians did not come in by busloads to protest the commemoration of the Jasenovac memorial. I was born in Zagreb. Okay, escaped it 1939, 1940. Okay, we escaped to the Italian side, which we heard were not killing Jews. The Italians were protecting us. From there, we made a long trip. Cut a huge story long. We escaped to Split. I tried to find out how the heck we got from Split to Italy. We went to northern Italy. We got to Trieste. We went to Aosta. Aosta, we found a partisan museum, which incredibly listed my name and all of us. There were 300 Yugoslav Jews that got to Aosta. From there, we were put into 7 small towns in northern Italy. This is northern West Italy, which was very anti-fascist and anti-German. So we were protected there. We had a wonderful care by these Italians in that area. So we go there almost every year now, and we love the area. But again, the Croatia, it's a major, that's right, I'm here today. I wanted to hear, because we were at the Jasenovac many years ago, and I found the names of my family there. And I'm so afraid now, again, because of the way the Croatian government is still operating, that they may want to hurt or close the Jasenovac. I hope that doesn't happen. Okay, next question. And this was sent to me by a very, very good German friend of mine, very anti-Nazi. I love the man, a major scientist. I said, look what's happening in Austria. I don't know if you were aware that maybe a year ago, a whole bunch of Ustascha went to Austria.
Okay, but now they banned, the Austrians banned Bleiburg this year.
Oh, they did? Okay. Thank you.
Us, you'll excuse me.
Oh. So, thank you. Okay.
Michael Dannon is a survivor of the Holocaust in Croatia. Did you want to say something about that?
Okay, just a few words about Bleiburg, which has become a symbol of Ustascha victimhood. Okay, remember the Ustascha are the perpetrators. They are trying to turn themselves into victims. So at the end of the war, there were 70,000, apparently the number is 70,000. There's a lot of inflating those numbers as well. 70,000 Ustascha and Croatian army, and there were soldiers and quislings, and there was Nazi collaborators of all sorts who they crossed the border into Slovenia, and they wanted to surrender to the British. But the British refused to accept their surrender, and they turned them over to the Yugoslav partisans who killed them. Now, the site of the mass execution is actually in Slovenia, but Slovenia forbids any ceremonies relating to these events. Forbids, that's good. What are you shaking your head? Forbids. Okay, it's very good. So they chose to go to a place called Bleiburg in Austria. Now, this event, which is on the Sunday closest to May 15th, has turned into a mass demonstration of neo-Nazis and fascists from all over Europe. And we've been working very hard to try and get them to forbid it. And it looks like this year, we finally succeeded, and it won't take place. We're also trying to get the Croatian government to ban Ustascha symbols, because, for example, to Thompson's concert, I mentioned this popular singer, Thompson, a lot of people come with Ustascha paraphernalia. I mean, it's absolutely mad. It's like people going to a concert in Germany and showing up with swastikas. It's exactly the same equivalent. So we've been trying, we're still trying, and we're working on it. And so in the meantime, we had a victory in Bleiburg, and hopefully there'll be more victories down the road.
That was a great victory, very big and very important. Mazel tov. Yes, please.
Hi. It's not a question, it's just a statement. When you say רצחת, ירשת, מחקת, it's not really מחקת, he never knew. And the problem here is with the education. I'm not talking about we here, because we are more knowledgeable and we know, but there are thousands of people all over, even in America, up and down, and all over the world that they don't know, and that's the issue. And when Oslo was written, I said it's no good because it was not about education, and it's already one generation, and they don't know anything. And that's the issue.
I just wanted to say, not only don't they know, but they don't want to know. I've been trying to contact schools to try to educate them about the Holocaust. I've sent emails to the principal, I've made phone calls, and I haven't gotten anything back. I think they're very complacent, just like what was mentioned by Ari Kagan, where they rode their skateboards. I actually saw them climbing on the memorial. I spoke to the parents. They wanted to report me because I told them this is a holy spot and what's the purpose. So I think it's not only lack of knowledge, it's also not wanting to know, and that's the main thing.
Okay, so first of all, obviously, Holocaust education is important, but I want to, in a certain sense, warn you of something. Don't think for a minute that Holocaust education is a magic potion that can eliminate anti-Semitism. First of all, some of the Holocaust education is all distorted itself. I don't know how many of you remember the book, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. Horrible, absolutely horrible. You saw this series now in Amazon, The Hunters? Pure bull. Okay, lo ayav lo nivrad. It never existed. These things never existed. I mean, there were Nazis in America, but they weren't about to take over Washington. There was Operation Paperclip. That's something completely different. So you have to be on your, you obviously have to do, we have to do a lot more. But there are things happening, and I'll just tell you very briefly. I went to Greenville, Tennessee, last week, okay? 2 teachers, non-Jewish teachers, are participants in a program called Echoes and Reflections, which is a joint project of Yad Vashem, ADL, and the Spielberg Foundation, okay? And they do webinars to teach these people about the Holocaust and to teach them how to teach the Holocaust, okay? So for the 5th year in a row, they brought together more than 2,000 students, 115 teachers, and also a couple of other people who, friends of the initiative, etc. And they spent the whole day discussing the Holocaust, listening to the Holocaust. I was invited to talk to them about justice. The theme this year was tzedek. Okay, we spoke about tzedek and how important it is to continue the efforts to bring Nazi war criminals to justice. And I can only tell you that these people are just unbelievable. All non-Jews, okay? They're passionate, they're devoted, and this has a multiplier effect. In other words, as time goes on, the program expands, there'll be more and more of these people. But again, I say, it's not a magic potion. It's important, but it can't solve all the problems of anti-Semitism.
Who has it? Dina, would you like to say?
You mentioned mass killing sites, mass graves. Was this Lithuania?
Lithuania, yeah.
Has any kind of work been done in Lithuania? Forgive me. Let me back up. Father Patrick Dubois. Was his work done in Lithuania?
No.
Ukraine.
Okay, listen. First of all, I'm in a very delicate situation. No, listen to me for a minute, okay? You're putting me in a very delicate situation now. Father Dubois, who's a person who goes to excavate the mass graves in Ukraine, okay, and to try and get testimonies of the people who saw it, eyewitnesses, etc., on the one hand, is doing something, it's a holy, sacred mission. But when we asked Father Dubois to get his information so we could bring the people who committed the crimes to justice, he refused to give us any information. Number one. Number two, Father Dubois wrote a book, his first book, okay, in which he whitewashed the Ukrainians. Now, why did he whitewash the Ukrainians? Because he hadn't completed his work in the Ukraine. So I said to him, you wrote a book as if the Ukrainians had almost nothing to do with the Shoah in Ukraine. He says, I'll write another book. I said, who's going to read your second book after they read your first book? You left them with the impression that Ukrainians weren't involved or hardly involved, which is a total lie.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, you're right. Yes. Yehuda, please. Okay. You have a question?
No. Just one answer what you say.
One.
So speak to her privately.
How short? Short.
About yeshivas, they don't let me in to talk about the Holocaust. Yeshivas, all the Hasidic yeshivas. Public school, I can talk. Yeshivas, I cannot.
Questions, please? Who's next? I wanted to say just one thing about the about Jasenovac also. We have the names of 20,000 children who were killed there, and we're talking about toddlers, infants, Jewish children, Serbian children. And I knew one of the Jewish survivors who was and I'm sure Efraim probably knows him too, Sadek Danin. Yeah, he was a grave digger at Jasenovac, and he was an eyewitness to some of these most horrible stories, which I collected and published, and he published as well. Question? Yes, please.
I believe Bosnia is primarily Muslim, am I correct?
Correct.
40%.
It depends which part of Bosnia. Bosnia is divided into two. There's the Republika Srpska, which is the Serbian enclave of Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the rest is a Muslim Croatian federation.
Did the Muslims play any roles in the Holocaust? Were they victims? Were they perpetrators?
No, perpetrators. They were collaborators. As a matter of fact, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, the Mufti of Jerusalem, recruited Bosniak Muslims to fight in the SS.
Yeah, the Hanjar was the main one. Yes. Did we answer your question? Anyone? Other questions, please? Yes, Michael.
Albania seems did not really chase too many Jews out. In fact, they took a lot of them into their families. What is your investigation into it, please?
This is a complicated issue.
It's a very complicated issue. There were Albanians who saved Jews. There were more Jews in Albania at the end of the war than before the war. But having said that, there were also Albanian Kosovar Albanians who collaborated with the Nazis and were involved in killing Jews as well.
That was a very, very important point, yes, because there's a lot of distortion about that. And maybe one other question. What's the future? I mean, with all this distortion, I know, I'm sorry. but really, I mean, the distortion just keeps going on and on and on. What's going to happen?
Okay. First of all, I don't know if you know what the Talmud says about prophecy. The Talmud says about prophecy that after the destruction of the temple, prophecy was given only to fools. So you want me to be a fool, to try and be a fool? Listen, there are encouraging things in some of these places. The book, our book in Lithuania was read by over 100,000 people. It was the most read book in public libraries for 3 years running. So this gives us hope. In other words, the impression is that it was the young people in Lithuania, the young people who grew up under the European Union and got a more liberal education. They're the ones who want to know the truth. And hopefully, eventually, the old patriots will die off and the truth will triumph. But this is our objective. In other words, this is the fight, and we're fighting as hard as we can. And so what I would suggest to all of you is if you support the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and help us in our efforts to win this very important fight.
Thank you, Efraim. Dr. Efraim Zuroff, thank you very much for one. And yes, he has his book. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And hopefully we'll have this event again soon.
I'll read it. Okay, one second. No, I'll sign them for you.